quite a time to be going through all of these changes. And you recently wrote a paper on artificial intelligence. And I want to start with just asking you about which countries you see benefiting the most and which you see being left behind in the most severe ways.
Let me start by saying that this summer, during my birthday celebration, I got a very interesting present. The nerds in my family, the younger people, gave me a portrait of me done by artificial intelligence. And I looked at it. It was actually a pretty good portrait. And I thought, this is moving faster than I thought. And with my colleagues, we looked into the data, and here is the answer to your question. From a labor market perspective, in other words, what happens to jobs, advanced economies and a very small number of emerging market economies are going to see the biggest opportunity for them, but also the highest risks. 60% of jobs in advanced economies over a foreseeable future are going to be impacted by artificial intelligence. And they would be impacted in one of two ways. If you're lucky, artificial intelligence will enhance your productivity, make your job more enjoyable, and very likely better paid. If you are unlucky, your job is gone. And that also means that who benefits is not determined only by whether you were born in a more developed country or not. It is determined by the kind of job you hold. When we looked at the impact on emerging markets and developing economies, emerging markets would see 40% of jobs impacted, low-income countries, 26%. You can say, well, that gives them longer time to prepare, but also it may mean that they miss on productivity. And why is this absolutely essential? Because over the last years, you mentioned I started 2019, since COVID hit us, the world has been either in recession in 2020 or growing relatively slowly, with the exception of 2021, that was a recovery year. 3% growth year after year after year, all the way in the next couple of years, is way below the historical average of 3.8%. That was the decade before COVID. So if we want to see better opportunities, increased in a standard of living, we need more growth. And to have more growth, we need more productivity.
So if artificial intelligence keeps accelerating at the pace that some people say that it is, where could the rate of growth go to from this 3% kind of grind that you see for the foreseeable future without it?
Well, let me just say the following. We did the paper you mentioned. We did a very interesting analysis on the prerequisites for artificial intelligence to be adopted in a country more effectively. And we came up with 4 criteria: digital infrastructure, human capital and labor market flexibility, innovation, and ethics and governance. And then we ranked all countries, actually 125 countries, on the basis of this criteria. Who came on top? Any guesses here?
The United States.
Number 2.
China.
Well, let me kind of shorten the suspense. Singapore. Singapore. And if you ever have been interacting with, say, the Singaporean minister responsible for artificial intelligence, if you have been there in their engagements, you would see why. So we have Singapore, United States, Denmark. Then a small group, and you can go Germany, Australia, UK, a small group of advanced economies here. Everybody else utterly unprepared for this new world.
So here comes a question, especially given the fact that the United States is putting a lot of money into this. China's putting a lot of money into this. They might not have all of those prerequisites, but they do have a lot of money that they're funneling into the development of this. Does that make your job harder? Because there's almost a new arms race between the most powerful nations that are all member states of the IMF.
What is making our job harder are two risks that come with artificial intelligence. One, increase of inequality. The world is already so unequal that it impacts the fabric of societies, and it spills over in protests on the streets, in lack of trust in governments. And artificial intelligence, unless this is attended, is going to deepen inequality. Those workers that would see their jobs enhanced, they'll make more money. But those that see their jobs gone, if there is no social safety net for them, they're going to be in deep trouble. And then across countries, inequality would grow. The second big risk we see from our perspective is on financial stability. Why we are concerned about that? Because artificial intelligence can lead to manipulation of data, of perspectives for companies and countries in a way that we have not seen so far. So what does it mean? Well, it means that governments have to wake up and take this very seriously. At the moment, I don't think they do. I don't think that they're looking at their level of preparedness seriously and then doing what is necessary to step up. But especially to figure out what do you do, how do you regulate something that changes so rapidly? And how do you regulate it to bring the risks of misinformation, disinformation down, but grab the productivity benefit?
That's where I wanted to go, misinformation. We're having elections in a number of places, including the United States. A big topic of discussion here is the prospect of Donald Trump being president yet again in the United States. He did just win the Iowa caucus in the fastest amount of time on record. How does that feature into some of your conversations and how misinformation could play into some of these things?
Well, this is actually even a higher concern than inequality because it has been expanding very rapidly. And what we now face is a big driver of mistrust comes from all this crap that is being thrown at people that you need to sort through. So we are benefiting in terms of you have multiple sources of information, but what we are seeing is quite dangerous. And then on top of it, you have cyber security risks. I'm born optimist. So I think we should focus on the opportunities and really reap these opportunities. But the risks are very significant and they're potentially very, very severe.
Aside from misinformation, and we're going to get back to this, I do just want to ask you, Christine Lagarde, your predecessor, was talking about Donald Trump on Thursday and was saying that he is going to be really harmful for Europe if he were to be elected again, another session of his. Do you agree with that?
I think it is for the American people to decide who is their president. When they decide, we would see who that is. For us, for the fund, what we look at are policies. What are the policies that are going to come, how they would affect the performance of the US economy, how they would affect the performance of the world economy. And when we look at the likely policies, well, in terms of being more conscious about the integrated global economy and how it benefits people everywhere, there may be some serious concerns.
Do you think in general that some of the technological advances are sort of fostering some of this populism that we're seeing grow up in a lot of political sectors?
Of course, when we first enjoyed social media, it was such a boom. You get information instantaneously. And now we see social media as a plus and a minus. I am very conscious of the fact that we have to allow transparency and data to flow. But for God's sake, when it is straight lie, we have to figure out a way to stop it. And I don't think this is being seriously addressed today. And artificial intelligence is going to make it so much harder. I mean, artificial intelligence can take, say, me, create a little speech I give in which I say, I hate Bloomberg with my own voice. And then here we go. I never ever can talk to Bloomberg. But I think,
are you inviting it? No, I'm kidding.
Yes, it is very serious. What we are seeing is there are some attempts to regulate, protect privacy, but address this straight lies problem. But so far, not so great, to be quite frank.
There's a question just in general about some of the populism and whether that will help some of the economic projections that you're looking for. Thinking of Argentina as one particular nation that just elected a new president, Javier Milei, who is thought to be a populist president. Do you think that his election makes it more or less likely that they're going to repay you the $45 billion they owe you?
Okay, so far, so good. They paid. They got into office December 11th, and they had payment on December 21st. They made the payment. We actually just completed a staff-level agreement because what this administration is doing is to very aggressively address some of the shortcomings we all see in Argentina. Fiscal out of whack, spend more than you can afford. Reserves wiped out. So we are seeing progress on all these fronts. Of course, what we also care deeply about is that as this administration moves with very bold reforms, there is also protection for the most vulnerable people. And we were very gratified in the staff-level agreement. There is specific reference to how the vulnerable Argentinians, and this is 40% of the population, how they would be helped with child credits, with food stamps, with more targeted attention to where the vulnerable population is.
One area perhaps on the other side of the extreme, or maybe actually similar, I'm wondering, China has the biggest delegation here, going back to 2017, which is interesting given these sort of conflicting messages that we've been getting about whether they want international business or whether they don't. What's been the message that you've gotten from them? Are they more concerned now about sluggish growth, or are they still more concerned about some of Xi Jinping's policies and ideologies?
I have had a couple of engagements with the Prime Minister Li Qiang, with the economic team. And what I drew out of it, two important messages. Number one, China recognizes that unless they move forward with difficult structural reforms, they will see growth dipping under 4%. And what are these reforms? Opening up, continuing with opening up, state-owned enterprises, addressing the local government debt. Short term, they have the issue of the real estate sector. So that recognition that what has worked for them for 40 years is what is the answer to their problems today is there. And secondly, a very strong determination to stay engaged internationally. And this is why you see this big plane landing here. They felt a bit the supply chain revamping. They have seen some outflow of capital, and they take this seriously. In China, the main objective for this year, next year, the year after, is to shift their growth first away from being so much export dependent to more consumption dependent, and second, emphasize more the quality of growth at a time when this country is aging. They have a demographic problem. The easy way of growing by getting people from rural areas going to urban areas pretty much, if not exhausted, diminished. So they have to come up with more reforms. It's not going to be easy, and it would require the country to stay in that lane. So hopefully here we would get a sense how determined they are to stay in that lane.
We just have a minute left, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, I know you are putting your economic projection in the next month or so. You previously had a 2.9% growth rate for 2024. Is it looking higher or lower than that?
Let me say 23 comes better than we expected by a small margin. There is some wind coming from 23 into 24. Stay put. End of January, you will see the number.
Okay. Well, I will just say this. Is the U.S. still heading for a soft landing? Is that still the
yes,
sort of...
U.S. poised for soft landing. Interest rates are probably going to start going down, I think, later in the year, but definitely in 2024. The only thing I want to say to everybody here is expect the unexpected. We have learned from the last couple of years that we make all our fancy plans, and then, boom, comes a shock, exogenous shock, and changes these plans.
So 6 rate cuts for the Fed.
The Fed is going to be data dependent.
Yes.
But it is true that the world economy, and especially the US economy, has proven to be remarkably resilient. I want to finish where we started, though, on the technological change, because I think we are not yet integrating the speed of this change and how much uncertainty there is of the impact, and we have to focus on that. I'll tell you a story. My granddaughter taught me a lesson. I was telling her, as a good grandmother, how when I was her age, 5, there was no TV, there were no computers. So she looked up at me and said, "So you only had iPads?" That is the speed of change.
Kristalina Georgieva, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.